Timberborn Update 6 recently landed on the Steam experimental branch, and it is a big one that is going to fundamentally change the way you go about building in Timberborn. In addition to the new endgame wonder building, we now have 3D water physics and a whole host of new structural buildings to take advantage of it. In this video, I'm going to go over what 3D water physics even is and why that's important, all the new buildings that have been added to take advantage of it, and give you some examples of the new crazy things that we can now build with them. First off, what is 3D water physics? Well, traditionally Timberborn has represented water using what they called 2.5 dimensions. So basically, water was represented using this 2-dimensional height map. For every location in the map, there was an associated value of how high the water level was at that point. Now, when it comes time to render the water, it's like laying a blue tablecloth over this height map. Now, while this height map makes simulating the water very efficient, it does have some trade-offs. Namely, you can't have any gaps in a column of water. So that means no aqueducts, no pipes, no tunnels, nothing like that. With 3D water physics, however, the Timberborn development team is now actually simulating the water in 3-dimensional space, which means that it is now possible to have those gaps in a given column. So aqueducts, bridges, pipes, draining water from the bottom of a dam, that's all now possible. And this enables a ton of new crazy things that you can build in the game. So kudos to the development team for figuring this out and finding a way to make it performant. And that brings us to the second topic. To take advantage of this new 3D water physics system, the Timberborn dev team added a whole host of new structural buildings. So let's take a look at some of those new buildings. First building I want to show is the addition of new overhangs. So overhangs look like one height stilts or platforms like we have today, but they have an addition of a platform that sticks over the edge that you can continue to build on. These are all fairly expensive. They require anywhere between, I think it is 4 and 12 metal blocks. So this is something that you'd probably get access to in mid to late game. We're also getting 2 new metal platform blocks, and these sit at one height in a variation of either a 3x3 or a 5x5. Now, you're probably thinking, hey, we already have this in the existing game. How is this different from the existing metal platforms? Well, the main difference is because of their height is now 1, you can now combine these with other platforms. And using this, I can get a foundation at whatever height I want. Now, together these enable a whole set of new construction that is, in my mind, pretty fun. One of the challenges in the game is that certain buildings are very difficult to build vertically. Usually, for example, a lot of the industry buildings like paper mills, gear mills, lumber mills. But with these overhangs, however, as long as you have the metal, you can start stacking up your construction in really interesting ways. So if you're really tight on space, you can now build your industry vertically. And because these platforms are so much bigger than our old platforms, it gives you a lot of room to do this. Personally, I really like that this gives us the option of very compactly building on top of some of the outdoor piles. For example, if you have a large pile, you can build something immediately over it and just get all that space back and continue to build them vertically. Now, unfortunately for regular large piles, you have to do at least 2 high, so it's a little bit harder to stack, but it is still possible. These large overhangs also open the possibility of reusing farmland. So in Timberborn, flat space is usually precious. You're usually using that for your food supply or for timber, and it's hard to get. And so with that dedicated to producing materials, you can't use that for industry or any of the other buildings. With the platforms, however, once you have access to metal blocks, it makes it really easy to build on top of this. For example, with a large overhang, you only need to be 1 height above your food. And now you could basically bury all your food production below ground and build your entire city up on top of it. You can also potentially pull this off with tree farms. However, you're gonna have to build at least 3 above ground, and you are gonna see a little bit of clipping. Now, with all these new options to build vertically, thankfully the developers also added a surprise addition of a new way to transfer power upward. You're probably familiar with this kind of stepwise vertical power shaft that exists now. Well, this new release has 3 new parts: a downward power shaft, a vertical power shaft, and an upward power shaft. And what this allows you to do is you can take horizontal movement that comes in through one of these, and then you can send power directly upward. For example, you can see here with this power shaft, I can go up a number that I want vertically, but I still have to choose a direction to end kind of that vertical shaft, to go back to kind of horizontal. I only wish that we had a vertical T-junction with these new vertical power shafts, just because if you're going to build vertically with a lot of these factories, it's still a pain to try to get power off. So as soon as I convert this over into horizontal power, I can't continue building vertically. One kind of hacky solution to this is you might be able to use other buildings to transfer power, since vertical power shafts do go through buildings as well. So for example, if I were to put down this house here, I could continue building up farther vertically as well as horizontally. So you can see that this house kind of works as a de facto T-junction vertically, even if we don't have a full piece for it. Another welcome addition is that windmills can now be placed directly on top of these vertical power shafts. Personally, I'm really excited about the possibility of combining all of these to make really interesting structures. For example, we've got here a kind of like treehouse complex where I built a stilt, platforms, overhangs, and more platforms, and I basically have a structure with all this new land all built on a single square. Going back to one of the earlier topics I was mentioning of these new structures being used for 3D water physics. So you're probably thinking these can be used for bridges, and you're absolutely correct, with one catch. You can see here that I've built a bridge that's going to carry water across. However, when the water, or in this case the bad water, gets to the height, it actually falls through the floor and continues all the way to the bottom. And that's because a new structure has also been added that can make structures waterproof. So by default, your solid objects, homes, buildings, whatever, water and bad water will simply go through it. There's now a new structure called an impermeable floor. And you can see when the impermeable floor is placed down, the water no longer flows through the bottom. So in this case here, I've got a bad water supply that I've managed to overpass something else. So for example, I could have a freshwater lake underneath and redirect that bad tide elsewhere. And this opens up a lot of possibilities for handling water on maps. For example, you can see here I've combined a large 3x3 platform as well as some regular platforms to basically make an aqueduct. And so I've left all this open space available for farming, and I've transported water over to the edge. Now, my only complaint with these is that they're relatively expensive. So again, this is probably something in the later game, or if you just want to build something really cool. There's also really interesting ways that you can combine kind of the metal platforms, and overhangs together to make really efficient aqueducts. So you can see in this case, I've combined a single 3x3 platform and then overhangs to make an aqueduct that only uses 2 spaces on the ground. Or for example, you can see here that I've taken the bad water that's coming down the river and basically put it on an elevated aqueduct above the regular river to route it out of the way. So again, all sorts of new interesting things that are now possible with this 3D water physics and platforms. I should also mention that the impermeable platform isn't limited to platforms or overhangs, though that's probably the first thing that you're thinking of. They can be put on any of the solid structures. So early game, you're probably not going to be able to afford a lot of overhangs. However, you could probably afford platforms, and impermeable floors can just as easily be built on top of them. This also means that you can put it on top of homes. So for example, I'm not sure why you would want to do this, but I think it's pretty funny. I've got a waterfall here, and you'll notice that there's stairs going up to that waterfall. Well, if I look inside, you can see I've actually placed a beaver's home underneath the river, given the home a roof of that impermeable barrier, and you can see that the beavers will actually happily go to bed there overnight, and it doesn't count as being a flooded building anymore. So again, that gives some interesting possibilities. For example, you could use homes and storage buildings as the foundation of aqueducts. You don't actually have to build bridges or other expensive buildings. You could just build on top of what you already have. And now over to what is probably my favorite new addition to the game, and that is the sluice gates. So the sluice gate is a new block that allows you to control the flow of water through it. So in the conversion of Timberborn, the main way that you get access to water is through your floodgates. And so your floodgates come in 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. And if you want water at the dam, you lower the floodgate. If you want to retain water, you raise the floodgate. Because floodgates can only go 3 deep, it really puts a limit to how big you can make your dams. For example, if you make a mega dam that's 5 blocks high, you're stuck with water at the bottom of the dam you can't actually use or get out of the dam. And you can see this is where sluice gates really come in handy. You are now able to build them at the bottom of your dam structures, and they have 3 settings. They can be closed, open, or set to an automation tab. But you can see in this case, if I put it open, I'm able to drain the bottom part of the dam and suddenly get access to this. Now, you're gonna notice a really problem with this is when I open this all the way, water is just gonna flood completely out, uncontained. It's just gonna keep draining from that dam until it is completely empty. which isn't quite what we want, which is where we go to this other tab here called the Auto tab. This is a really powerful part of sluice gates, is that they allow you to automate the conditions of which it will let water through. You'll notice that there are 3 checkboxes for automated conditions. And when this is enabled, it basically means that when that condition is met, the sluice gate will do that action. So in this case, the first one that is checked by default is close when the downstream depth is above 0.7. And so what that means is when the water down here at the end of the sluice gate is above 0.7, it will automatically close. And you can see that height is represented by this blue kind of line here. So if I move this up and down, you can see what that height means. So let's say I were to put it right here, like at 0.25. Now what's gonna happen is this sluice gate is gonna let all that water through until it hits this. The top of this dam still has a full supply of water, but it's not gonna let anything else through. So you can see this creates a little bit of conundrum because this dam isn't gonna let water through yet because it's not high enough. But if we were to increase this to let water through up until say 0.7, it's gonna hit the threshold for this dam. And now we have a steady supply of water downstream. And this is just going to continuously let water out, regardless of how much water is in the top level, just keeping that regulated flow. And you can do some other really interesting things with that. So for example, one of the things I really struggled with in one of my earlier videos was having a water farm and keeping it regulated at 1 water height. With the sluice gate, I can do that all automated. So you can see I've got this giant supply of water here, and I've configured a sluice gate just to keep a constant supply of 0.5. And you can see now I have just the bare minimum amount of water that I need for my water farm. It's always going to be full, and I don't have to sit here and fiddle with things. Now the sluice gate has 2 other possible automations in here, which are really interesting for automating handling of the bad tide. And so what these do is they basically can open or close the gate when the contamination level of the water hits a certain threshold. So I've got this river here, and it reaches a junction in the road. So what I could do is I could take one of these, the one that's going off the map, and I could say it's closed as long as the water is below a certain contamination level. The good one, I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna say that it closes as soon as the water becomes contaminated. So you can see I've got clean water. The clean water is able to flow through no problem. As the water reaches that contamination level threshold, it gets cut off. Now the other supply water is getting directed off the map. So the last thing I want to show with 3D water physics in these new buildings is pipes. With water, there's this idea of communicating vessels, which basically means that if you have different vessels of water that are connected somehow, they're ultimately going to have their water levels equalize. An interesting part of the 3D water physics release is that we actually start seeing this principle show up in the game. You can see here I've created 2 different tanks of water, and I've connected them using an underground tunnel. And if I look underground, we'll just show what's going on here. And so what I've done is basically dynamited a row of water under the ground, had it go underneath the river, and then place some impermeable blocks just as it goes under the river. And at the very end, I've got a sluice gate, which is closed at the moment. What we should see is that this should fill with bad water in the pipe, but it's going to be stuck at that sluice gate. The way this works is that when I open that gate, the water levels between these 2 containers should normalize, which means that I'm going to basically fill this container over here from the bottom until it equals the height of the one on the left. Did overflow a little bit in the beginning. Now, as the system has reached a stable state, you can see that the water is completely the same in both. I think there's going to be some interesting things to build with this. I'm still trying to figure out all the different use cases, but I'm really curious to see what the community is going to come up with. But that's going to do it for this recap. Again, this is a very exciting update, especially if you've wanted to build aqueducts, bridges, and tunnels in the past, but were limited by what the engine could do. Update 6 is going to unlock a whole slew of different things that you can build. Hope you enjoyed this video, and hope to catch you next time.